Hello, I'm Yolanda Cooper. I'm the Vice Provost and University Librarian here at Case, and I want to welcome you all to the Fellows Forum and thank you for coming. The Freedman Fellows work in partnership with library experts to develop new forms of scholarship. Examples you'll see today. And this center in particular and the Fellows Program wouldn't be possible for the generous contributions and support from the Freedman family, especially Walter and Karen Freedman. The Center and Fellows Program is a special one, and it's really one I always look forward to because I'm really interested in the different types of scholarship that faculty are engaging in. So thank you all for doing that. I also want to thank the KSL Research and Engagement Services Team, the Administrative Services Team, and the Digital Scholarship Team for all the work they did on this and selecting and working with the fellows and marketing and arranging this event. I, of course, again, want to thank the fellows for their willingness to share their research with us today and to explore and engage new technologies for digital scholarship. While you take a look at our event today, I'd like you to consider applying for a 23-24 fellowship opportunity. The call will be going out soon, and the team will be setting up consultations for those that are interested. With that, I'm going to turn this over to our newly appointed Freedman Fellow Program Coordinator, Ben Gorham.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us at this event. As some of you know, I am Ben Gorham, the Research Data and GIS Specialist here and the appointed coordinator of the Freedman Fellowship Program. And by way of introduction, I'd just like to say that what a privilege it is, and it has been, to work with so many of our fellows over these years. Here at the Freedman Center, we are always invested in the evolving technologies of digital scholarship, as well as in the researchers who use them. As a digital scholarship center, it's part of our mission to find new tools and methods and to induct them into the repertoire of researchers across campus. And we are fortunate to partner with researchers at every stage of the research lifecycle, from planning to publication, everywhere in between, and to explore their projects and these digital resources together. Our collaborators come to us from across campus, and their projects run the gamut as well, they have throughout the years, from School of Nursing undergrads building digital networks of inter-hospital transport routes, to classics professors generating 3D virtual reconstructions of ancient artifacts from CT scans, and everything in between there as well. And we've found that often, for digital scholarship projects especially, the process is the product. The process of experimentation, of iteration, and of discovery has the power to transform not just a researcher's current project, but also the trajectory of their future research as well. So today we're going to hear from a variety of presenters in this arena, faculty and student fellows from across the university, about their Freedman Fellowship projects at whatever stage they currently stand. You know, it's a blessing and a curse that so many digital scholarship projects grow to a scope much larger than can be contained in a single academic year. But it's always a pleasure to work alongside these researchers and see where they stand today. Some brief points of order. Each presenter has about 10 minutes allotted to talk, and we have a 5-minute buffer for questions in between each presentation. Snacks are in the back in case you haven't already got them, and we don't have any big built-in breaks, but feel free to use the restroom just behind the elevators or stretch your legs if you need to today. So with that, let's just kick things off with our first presenter. I think you all have programs. Kevin Inouye from the Department of Theater to talk about motion capture scene work for actors. And feel free to find your presentation.
So I'm just going to run some video in the background to try and give you something more interesting to look at than me. So this project is a good example of things that evolve over the years, I suppose. I originally started on a mix of Freedman and ACES Plus and Glennon fellowships, trying to, during the pandemic, find out about whether or not true first-person perspective was more useful for learning movement than our traditional set up a camcorder in the back of the room and model things kind of approach. Sorry, trying to type and talk at the same time. But what I found out pretty quickly was that while playing with Jared Bendis's toys that he's got downstairs, true first person isn't really doable with just recording video, because you can't put a camera inside someone's head, and if you turn around with the headset on, you see a close-up of the other person's face. It's a little weird, there's stuff like that. So evolved pretty quickly into using motion capture equipment, and that kind of went in two main aisles. I teach movement and acting and stage combat, or taught, which is next steps. But there's a couple areas where this came up. One is in movement analysis. And so this would be an example of the purely neutral motion capture data. Once I had those suits, trying them on the students and getting them to do things like identify your classmates just by their movement. We actually had at least one student this last fall who could not identify herself correctly, having been the one that did it. But it was interesting to see like who got confused and mistaken for one of their other classmates, because they might not look anything alike, but they might move similarly. So just in terms of awareness of habits and being able to analyze movement, this was useful. But then the area which was, I think, more fun for most people, and this is from a previous year's experiment, was being able to sort of digitally puppeteer these avatars. And this, is perhaps similar to some of the stuff that we do in movement classes with mask and puppetry and stuff like that. But it's a little bit more speaking the native language of our students today, because while masks and puppets might be a little creepy to some of them, I found, which makes me a little sad, ideas of video games and movies like that comes very naturally to them. So one of the things that they were requesting to do in previous years was to be able to actually do some scene work, two people scenes. So I did get some more grants to be able to get a second one of these setups. They're not suits per se. I wanted the strap-based ones, so I didn't have to worry about sizing and dry cleaning things and whatnot. And then the work that the Freedman part did with that was working with a student, Morgan Gillespie, to refine the program. So what we ended up with is a standalone Unity program where we could have up to 2 actors at a time. And there's sort of a drop-down list of different stock characters we were able to get for free that they could choose between. We can toggle between those. We can toggle between a few different backgrounds. And so the data from the suit is still coming in continuously, and we can adjust just to be able to get a little bit better workflow, because a lot of it is about trying to maximize the time students actually get to play with this stuff, rather than sit there recalibrating and readjusting and going back out to the menu and trying to get things to work again. So in that sense, I think it was fairly successful. We have a number of different types of settings and characters that we could play with to try and get different types of movement out of our students. This was originally proposed as something to be done with the graduate MFA students who have much more time. The plan is a 2-year MFA movement curriculum for them over the course of it. But my contract was not renewed, in part due to complaints they made about things I was doing trying to teach movement and stage combat over Zoom during COVID times. So I have, this was my undergraduate movement class, which I had last fall, that I did get to work with a little bit, but they had much less time. So we didn't actually get into full-on recorded scene work, as I'd originally hoped to do. So we basically did the same thing with the undergrads that I was able to do with the grads in a previous year. We just have a slightly slicker program now with which to do it. It was popular with both the grads and the undergrads, even despite some of the technical hurdles that come from trying something new and having to go back and recalibrate and whatever else when there's an error on a sensor. There were times when I was being in the review where they were like, is it true that you presented something that you've been studying for less than a year? Nobody said that about mocap because they liked that. So it was pretty universally popular, even when it fit the categories of things that they were saying they didn't want me to be doing. So I think that's a sign of success. It is a great example of technology that is evolving really rapidly. So these suits were kind of the cheapest weight for me to get into it for the classroom right now. But especially with AI image processing, we're hitting a point where you should be able to just stick up a couple of cell phones in a room and have multi-person mocap capture probably within a year. I mean, you can already do it now, but it's not live. And in terms of feedback for the performers, being able to see that thing up on the screen really helps them right now. So that is rapidly changing, which is cool to see. we were not able to get the facial animation. That was another aspect that required some additional coding to get the apps that record facial data added to the body capture stuff from the suit. That's another thing that was kind of on our to-do list that didn't end up happening. But given the constraints of how much we were able to do with the students anyway, I felt like that wasn't worth pushing too hard for. But it is something where this equipment now purchased through a variety of grants this is another interesting thing to think about. When you leave the university, where does this stuff go? Whose is it? And so we're not sure yet if anyone's going to try and pick this up in the department. So far, nobody's expressed interest, but I'm not sure who's going to be replacing me. Does it end up in the Freedman Center? Does it end up somewhere else? So, it's kind of like creating a living will. When you think about the equipment that you get for your lab, what's going to happen to it? And I'm not sure a lot of us have thought about that when we're writing those grants. So yeah, there may be, I know at least one of the candidates for my position has done motion capture in the past. There may be somebody who's wanting to pick this up and is able to. But if not, it's something that there has been interest in at other institutions. Some of what I've been interviewing for recently would allow me to continue it. Some of it is instructor positions that would not, because I just don't have the support at the time. But it is definitely an area where students were interested. And so I do think that one way or another, this is going to come to higher ed theater training programs in the same way that acting for the camera did. And similarly, probably about 10 or 15 years later than it should have. Because again, the interest and the demand in the market is there before the program has courses created around it generally. So if nothing else, I think this has gotten some folks excited about the possibilities in the medium. And as a sort of a proof of concept, I think it has succeeded. And that's about my time. So.
So I see you're using YouTube to share the video and demonstrate today, and I wondered if you're seeing a lot of traffic on the YouTube videos from outside of the institution.
It depends on what you consider a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, by social media TikTok standards, no. I think that classroom instruction video has, 75 views or something now.
Yeah.
That was the one that I uploaded after the last year's thing completed. I haven't done as much this year just because I haven't been wanting to talk about job stuff publicly until I had some more definite answers.
And are there other social media platforms that you use to share this type of
So I've been sharing some of that on Facebook, and I'm a part of a community of movement and theater teachers as well, and so sharing some of that work there with folks who I thought might be interested. There is an acquaintance of mine I met through workshops up in Canada, and another one who's currently in Australia doing motion capture work there. And my Canadian colleague was interested in use of VR as a rehearsal tool. So his idea was he wants to have a group of us rehearse a stage combat fight scene in VR and then perform it for the first time with each other up in Canada at a workshop this January. So we're still trying to wait and see if that will work, or if I'll even be able to go, or things like that. So there's a lot we don't know, but there are other areas of interest where this has been popping up. Because to be able to rehearse something physical in the virtual world, it does help to have more data points than just your headset and the controllers in your hands. And so that is another market for motion capture, is sort of high-end VR gaming stuff. Yeah.
I have two questions. One, oh, sure. Yes.
For the record.
Yes. Microphone. So first question is a little perhaps tangential to your discipline, but do you see like applications for like inhabiting other bodies here, like dealing with things like body dysmorphia, or people being able to experiment with what it is to be someone else?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, there are certainly avenues that somebody who is more interested in dealing with human subject research boards than myself could explore in terms of things like body dysmorphia or anorexia or other gender identity issues, of sort of giving you a previs for inhabiting different bodies. There's also some of the some different avenues of research that I've worked on previously involve incorporating things into sort of our body schema. So this idea of how do I make a prop that I'm working with an extension of my character's will rather than just this thing that happens to be in my hand. And a lot of the interesting research from that also comes around people who are being fitted for prosthetics and whether or not they can kind of psychologically accept that as being a part of their body or this weird thing that is strapped to my stump. Right, and there's been some fascinating research coming out of the Gulf War and other areas of sort of phantom limb syndrome and accommodation of prosthetics. It's possible that some of this could also help with that. I don't know. Just being able to see it as a part of the same body. Yeah, I mean, as the technology becomes more accessible, I think we'll see a lot of other people trying to figure out, well, how can I use this in my discipline?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the other question I had was, do students who are involved in this, do they have any kind of reflections at the end where they write up like their experiences, how it made them feel, that sort of thing?
And most of it was, we never really got enough contact time to get past the initial novelty. So a lot of it was just like, oh, this is cool. I wish we could do more kind of stuff. Once you get into actually using this stuff, let's say we're talking about making video games, it gets highly technical very quickly in terms of creating action nodes that have to meet up in different areas. And we got some of that from the guest artist that we brought in, I guess, last year. And she was talking about her work helping develop the motion for the Massive software, which is what Weta in New Zealand used for Lord of the Rings armies and things like that, creating the various different ways that those digital characters might decide to act at different moments. I think a lot of that would require collaboration with somebody in game design who is interested in video game creation on that end of things, or I also tried to collaborate some with set designers because a lot of, anytime you can create an environment, whether that's through CAD/CAM software, whether that's through photogrammetry of just scanning things, it's fairly easy to drop those environments into something like this and be able to interact with it that way. So I think there's potentially a lot of areas where it might go, and I think students were interested in seeing where it might go. But the idea of, as with a lot of things in theater and film, it's highly collaborative, and trying to do it on your own is difficult and limiting. So yeah, it would need a little bit more of an institutional onboarding to be able to make that work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Next up, thank you, sir. I believe we have, yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia Dimitropoulos from the Department of Psychological Sciences. The work that we're doing in my lab is a little bit different than what Kevin presented, I think a little bit more less sexy, I guess, to look at, but very important to us. So just to give you the sort of bottom line to begin with, because then I'll tell you about our work. We have been developing an intervention for several years in my lab. This is a collaboration between myself and Sandra Russ, who is now an Emeriti Distinguished University alum, whose work influenced part of this project. And so it all started with a happy chance occurrence in the hallway on the way to the bathroom many years ago, when we decided that my work and her work might actually be a good collaboration. And so that's where it starts. And so most, if not all, of this work has really been led by our project coordinator, Evelyn Nichols. She's a research assistant in my lab. She's been doing wonderful work this year on what we call the expansion project with Jared. So she is really the person behind this. I am just here to talk today. And she happens to be in Mexico, so she's not even here to answer questions. So before I tell you about our intervention, I need to tell you about why we need to intervene in the first place. So my lab is focused on understanding behavioral and cognitive characteristics of people with neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and rarer disorders like Prader-Willi syndrome. So I've spent a lot of my work thinking about this population of individuals who are born with a genetic syndrome called Prader-Willi syndrome, or PWS, where their hallmark characteristic is overeating, so what we call hyperphagia. And this is due to some altered mechanism between gut and brain that says, hey, you're full, right? So that's what we typically have, and kids with Prader-Willi syndrome have this altered mechanism. We're not sure why. We're still working on treating it. In my lab, we are focused on eating a little bit, but mostly more recently focused on the social cognitive characteristics that go along with having Prader-Willi syndrome. So people with PWS have intellectual disability and social challenges similar to what we would see in autism spectrum disorder. So we've been looking at that for several years. And along the way, we realized that they really have a hard time playing. Even from young childhood, they have a hard time interacting in a way to make meaningful pretend play, which you may not think is important, but actually is very important to learning and cognition as you age. And so because Prader-Willi syndrome is so rare, prevalence is 1 in 15,000. And so just to give you a reference point, Down syndrome is 1 in 1,000, and autism, as of a couple weeks ago, is 1 in 34, right? So this is a pretty rare disorder, which means that we don't have a population of people with Prader-Willi syndrome living right here in Cleveland that can come in for intervention weekly, right? So when we see our individuals, we often have to fly out to them, or they fly to us, or we go to conferences where we see them. And so this is how the Pretend program was born. And this was born before the pandemic. At some point, we realized, you know what, we should probably think about how do we tailor intervention for this population, and how can we do that in a meaningful way. And you know, at that point, pre-pandemic, we realized that video conferencing might be the way to go. And so, oops, hold on a second. Let's see. Okay, so that's how the Pretend program was born. The Pretend program stands for Play-Based Remote Enrichment to Enhance Development. It is a remotely delivered intervention program for children who are school age and preschool. I'll come back to that in a minute. And the goal really is twofold. One is to optimize pretend playability, because we know that this is not naturally happening for children. Typically developing children, you don't need to teach them how to play. And for those of you who have young children or have interacted with young children, you know that this comes easily to them. For our kids with PWS, they have a harder time. And so our goal is to optimize pretend play. And this is where Sandy Russ's work comes in, because this is her area of expertise. The other thing we wanted to do was use play as a platform for intervention. So working on the things that kids with Prader-Willi syndrome have challenges with, like social cognition and social competence, behavioral rigidity, transitions, cognitive flexibility, and then emotional understanding and emotional regulation. And so we developed this program, and pre-pandemic, we didn't know whether we could play with children over Zoom. And so our school-age children, 6 to 9, were offered direct intervention. So an interventionist would have toys at her desk, and the child would have the same set of toys in their home, and they would play together for the session. For our preschoolers, we really didn't think that would work, and we also felt like parents needed to be looped into this process. And so we developed a program so that parents could learn best practices in pretend play and working with their children. So our preliminary findings for this study, I promise I'm getting to the expansion project. Our preliminary findings were that, yes, we could play with children. Yes, they liked it. Parents liked it. And we saw some good changes for our school-age kids with direct intervention. And we saw some good changes for our preschoolers, but that was actually mediated by how stressed mom was. So if mom was really stressed, then the response was not as good for those preschool children, and if they had elevated behavior problems. So if something else was going on, it seems to be mediating the response. So our funder for our work was really excited about this. So the rare disorder population groups are typically run and spearheaded by parents. So the parents in this grant, this group, were very excited about getting this out to a wider use. And I have a small lab. I don't have time to do intervention with everyone across the country. So we needed a way to develop that. And that's where the Freedman Fellows program comes in with what we call our expansion project. And so here our goal was to develop a platform so that we can train other people to use our intervention. And they can use it in person with a child in their hometown, right? So it didn't have to be remote. That was the way we had to do it to be able to work with this rare disorder population. But our goal was to train other people to use it and to do it in a systematic way. And so our ultimate goal, and we're in the process of this, is that our goal is to have families identify someone in the child's life that could learn the intervention. The person that we would call a facilitator would go to the online platform, train on the intervention, become reliable at it, and then use the intervention, the platform that we've developed to then facilitate the intervention to the child and the family. And the parents, in order to keep it systematic and structured, would access resources from that platform as well. So we have been working with Jared Bendis, who has been wonderful to help us think through what should this platform look like. How do we do this? How do we account for people needing to access different parts of the platform? And that's where the expansion project sort of is at right now. So we had basically a PDF of a manual that we've been using for years, and we've been trying to think about on the content side, how do we make this structured in a way that would be easy for someone to train on it on our platform. And so we've at this point decided that the platform will have 3 arms: the training arm, the implementation arm, and the parent arm, right? So the first facilitator training, someone is identified as someone who's going to train to be an interventionist. They will complete the modules, and we've decided to do this through like a training video format where they can do a knowledge check after, and we may build in, them submitting videos for us to evaluate. We haven't figured that out yet. And we're basically training them to use the intervention the way we used it. The parent training component, same thing. We've taken what we've used as our content and build that out into a platform so a parent can come, get extra resources, and then also work with that facilitator to learn to be part of the intervention as is structured in our protocol. Yeah, I know, I talk a lot. So those are the 3 arms. The rest of the details are not necessarily as important. Jared has been helping us think through, what this would look like. And on our end, we're trying to figure out, what will this look like for parents? Is this feasible? Is it something that we may need to develop just for parents to do with their children? Will they be able to find a facilitator to work with their child? So there are things that we're working on. However, I want to show you a little bit about what that looks like. Really quickly before I'm done.
Just here, I'll take you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, so let's,
Really
yeah. I want to show you just a quick clip. So as you can see, my slides today are modeled off our training modules. Evelyn has been working really hard on this. So I'm just giving you a clip of what would a parent experience if they were going to access the resources.
Affect, organization, and imagination into your play session.
Can you guys hear that?
Our first strategy is modeling. Modeling can be described as demonstrating or showing a play skill.
You can see it too. I did.
Description
Oh,
and demonstration.
okay, that's better.
Description is when you use words to describe what you are doing. Demonstration is when you show your child what you are doing. Examples of modeling can include: I'm going to have my boy go to the beach. Here he goes. Vroom, vroom. This block could be a birthday present. I think the sister could be sad she didn't get a turn on the swing.
All right, I'm going to have them go to sleep as the end of our story.
Next up,
So that's just a little bit about what we're doing. So you could see that we've been using KSL equipment and rooms to also do our video modeling as well. We've also brought in, a young child actor to sort of act it out for real so that we're not just having our ARAs do it. And we're really thankful to the Freedman Fellows Program for this because this is obviously not my expertise. And so we have had a wonderful experience working with Jared, and we'll continue, hopefully, to talk to Jared as we finalize this platform. He was able to get us to, we now have a website, right? Is that what we have a website? We have a domain name. We're moving forward. So thank you. Sorry I ran late.
So will a part of this also be creating a... There we go. Yep. So will part of this also be creating a sort of a database where people can find people who have been through this program, since it's such a rare issue, to then finding somebody who knows what they're talking about?
You mean
might be
someone
quite a
who's been
challenge.
trained?
Yeah. So is there going to be like a list of
That's a
people?
good idea.
Yeah. There you go.
We're not that far yet. And actually, we're submitting the next grant for continuing this work. And one of the reviewers in the letter of intent was like, how are you going to get anyone who has any bandwidth to learn this on top of their regular job? So we are now sort of thinking that through and thinking, is it really something that parents are going to parents don't have time with this syndrome to actually do this. So we're trying to work out who is the best person to do that. And I think we're building that into sort of talking about it in the grant, like developing that and talking to the community about it. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I have kind of two questions. One is, how many children have you been able to do this experiment with? And do you have any kind of like preliminary results that show that working with the like community facilitators is, as effective as it was when the researchers were conducting the study?
That's a good question. So we're not there yet. We're still building the content. And so we would like to, and we have funds actually from the Fellows Program to incentivize our beta testers. And so we've had some parents and some students sort of take a look at our modules just to see, is the content right? Is the pace right? Is it clear? Do we need to change things? So we've made some changes based on that. But we don't know that yet. So, and we want to build that in. We want to build in the research component to this by testing whether that will be, a efficacious way to do this. And we're still working on that.
I want to actually praise you again, because your team has done an amazing job of really demonstrating sort of what a idealized process is for us. You made it really easy because you have content and a problem. And you took that to us, and we were able to just give you a variety of solutions, but more importantly, your willingness to do what was basically information design, taking what you already knew and restructuring it in a variety of ways. And so this is sort of an idealized way of putting a project like this together. It was so like, we have this, we need this, we have no idea what the processes can be. And that open-mindedness was really great. And also the nonstop meetings. We met every week, sometimes more than once a week on this. So I just want to, again, your team has been really...
We would be nowhere without you. So
No, but you guys have been really driven to just pushing this forward. And you're actually ahead of where you thought you'd be. At one point, you only thought you were going to do one module, you ended up doing two. So congratulations.
Yeah, she's trucking along. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I just have to.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. No, just saying we are moving on to, where are we? Here we are. Okay. Next up, we have a pre-recorded presentation from one of our student fellows, whom Jared is going to introduce here. You want to leave this up, or you want to, her video's right there?
Yeah, I'll be ready for the video.
Okay, cool.
This will be a brief introduction. So, one of the things that I love about these things is that all results are results. And so in this case, I think the words are mitigating circumstances. This project got delayed, totally out of her hands, got delayed. It was a good project when she proposed it. It's a good project now, and they've started it at the end. So it's all been delayed, but it's all working out really, really well. It is really nice that everything actually came together. This actually could have ended very, very differently. And it's kind of fun to think about those types of things as well. Not everything goes as smoothly as you want it to. And what happens when that happens is part of the process. Any of these projects could easily have been derailed by, oh, I don't know, a technology didn't work, or, the other funding didn't come through, or the whole premise just didn't feel right. So in this case, we got something that initially felt like it wasn't going to work. And then all of a sudden, in just the past few months of, oh my God, what are we doing? It's like, all right, so we have offered an extension for this project, but we didn't want to miss out on an opportunity to say, well, what was the project and what will it be when she presents again next year? So she couldn't be here, but she made a really cool video and I want to introduce it. And it's pretty awesome. And I can't wait to see it again next year. So let me hit play on this.
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Prajakta Joshi, and I am a second-year PhD candidate in the Biomedical and Engineering department at the university. And first of all, thank you so much for letting me do this over video. Unfortunately, I could not be there because I'm traveling for a conference in Baltimore. So thanks a lot to the committee for letting me join like this. So I'll start with introducing myself a little bit. I basically have a background in electronics engineering, and I also have some background in neuroscience. So I joined the PhD program at KS to combine my interests in both the fields, and I'm now in the track of neural engineering, doing my research with Parkinson patients. So let me give you a quick background about my research. So basically, the overall theme of my PhD project is about understanding the role of basal ganglionic circuitry in proprioceptive processing. So proprioception is how your brain knows where your body parts are without even looking at them. And basal ganglia is a group of neurons that are very essential for control and coordination of movement. The role of these basal ganglia neurons in motor control is known for a long time, and they are of much interest due to their misfiring in movement disorders like Parkinson's and dystonia. However, basal ganglia's role in processing any kind of sensory information still has a lot of exploring to do in the area of research. Recently, our lab published a paper where we showed that basal ganglia neurons are responsive to high frequency vibration, which can actually be considered as a form of proprioceptive modulation. So we have a few more experiments that we recently started running in our lab where we are exploring the effects of proprioceptive modulation on the basal ganglia using electrophysiological measurements. For the project proposed to Freedman Fellowship, we want to model the behavior of basal ganglia to understand how the different brain structures would be communicating with each other within the basal ganglia and also with other parts of the brain. So as you can see in this figure, it is quite a complex circuitry, and modeling it will take a lot of efforts and a lot of data to be collected from different parts of brain. So to understand different parts, we are setting up different kind of experiments. The experimental setup that I had been supported with my Freedman Fellowship Award is the one with biking. Here is the setup, and we call it as dynamic biking for Parkinson patients. So I basically work with Parkinson patients, and which is a movement disorder where patients suffer from motor symptoms like tremor, rigidity, reduced movement, and postural imbalances. While there are medications to control these symptoms, however, to complement them, physical therapy is often prescribed, of which biking is a form. It is a form that is known to be helpful for Parkinson patients. The bike that we are using in the setup that is shown in this slide is kind of a special bike in the sense that the bike changes speed continuously. That mimics how you would bike in an actual setup. It's also a motorized bike so that patients are able to maintain the speeds that we want them to maintain. So, the rationale behind the whole project is that since biking is a form of exercise, the known effects are like increased cardiovascular output, muscle strengthening. However, when a person who bikes moves his lower limbs again and again in this particular manner and in a particular speed, which leads to continuous changes in the proprioceptive feedback of the. It is providing continuous information about where your legs are and where they are supposed to move continuously to the brain. And this proprioceptive changes, which are variable in case of variable speed of biking. So now this changing proprioception for a longer duration, for example, for 30 minutes, for 12 sessions, actually can have a potential to induce good amount of effects on the motor control circuitry, which I showed in the last slide. Let me just quickly go back to that. So when the proprioception is being changed continuously, the whole circuit might try to adapt to it. So we are trying to measure everything, like motor symptoms and the signals that are basically being generated in the brain of Parkinson patients using a recording device like this. This is like an oversimplified picture, but I hope you get an idea. So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to get all the data of their movements, of their biking speed, of how the biking speed is changing. And we are also recording while they are biking, before they are biking, and after they are biking. So we want to feed all this data to a model to predict how different structures of basal ganglia might be working towards getting better symptoms using biking. So this was the rationale behind the grant, and I'm so glad I got the Freedman Fellowship because to put together the model and to train the model accurately, we want to be able to collect more and more data. So the rationale behind applying for the digital fellowship was actually twofold. One was to receive a little more funding as an additional compensation for participants for long-term and longer-running experiments where we are also recording the electrophysiological recordings, that is the recordings from the brain. And another intent was to obtain some guidance as a part of digital fellowship for the modeling part of the project. So I'll just quickly run through my timeline and my future plans. So putting together this whole setup for the experiment was actually a big challenge, and we were finally able to complete it at the end of March 2023, which almost took around 8 months later than what we expected from our original plans due to some paperwork and technical delays from the company who makes the bike. So I also remember writing to the Freedman Fellowship Committee that I won't be able to make use of the award since I don't have people to bike to recruit for. But the whole committee was very nice and patient with me, and fortunately, we were able to finish the setup. And the good news is that this month we recruited our first participant. So the participant is currently on his 11th session of biking as of today, out of his 12 sessions, and we are still in the process of collecting data. Our initial approach to the modeling on the modeling front was an in-house model, but now we think we can do a very detailed model since we recently started collaborating with another computational modeling lab. So whatever data we are collecting with these participants is actually going to help us a lot. So on that front, we have finalized our approach and the details to the level which every structure should be coded. And we are now really excited to put this model together and test it with the data that we are collecting. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for letting me join remotely. And I hope you all have a good day. Thanks. Bye.
You may have questions. She's not set up to answer.
But I am. No, I'm not. No, actually, it was just an excellent thing where during this process, there again a lot of things could have gone wrong, and right at the end, everything just kind of came together. Their financial situation allowed for it to carry over. They finally got their clearance from the IRB with their PI, and then they also were able to get the equipment in. So everything, which was a few months of legitimate panic, I'm not going to lie, turned into it worked out, and that is, by the way, part of the process for everybody here. So it all worked out, and I can't wait to see the results. But data is being collected, and you can't get better than that.
That's great.
Anyway,
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we have a presentation from Jill Aquidara. Come on down. And you have just the slides, or?
Yeah, it's just slides.
Great, then this is all yours.
Thank you. Okay, hey everyone, I'm Jill. I'm a clinical psychology PhD student here. I'm finishing up my third year right now. And I had the opportunity to use the Freedman Fellowship in order to conduct a study called Internalized Stigma in Schizophrenia Spectrum Disorders. I'll get more into the details of how the Freedman Center has supported my ability to do this project in a little bit, but just to summarize, it was mainly the qualitative data analysis methods that I was able to do because of the Freedman Center support. So first, a little background information on why I chose to do this study. So schizophrenia and related disorders like schizoaffective disorder are psychotic disorders, which involve sometimes pretty debilitating symptoms, including like a difficulty with distinguishing reality at times. Oh, okay. And some of the symptoms that you probably have heard most about would be like hallucinations and delusions, but it can also include some other symptoms like distressing paranoia, social withdrawal, sometimes loss of motivation. And on top of the symptoms, there's also quite a big public health cost too, because oftentimes people who are incarcerated or homeless or unemployed, unfortunately, sometimes it's due to mental illness, including schizophrenia. And then on top of the symptoms, internalized stigma or really just stigma in general is another thing that people with these disorders have to face, because schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder are some of the most stigmatized mental illnesses. And public stigma is where like you hear from other people negative attitudes and beliefs about you or your disorder, whereas internalized stigma is when you start to actually believe those things about yourself. And so the internalized stigma is the part that I was most interested in looking at for this study, because, there's a lot of focus on public stigma at the moment, not as much on internalized stigma, so it's an area that needs further research. We know that there are negative impacts of internalized stigma, but it's still a little unclear what the impacts are. So that was part of my goal for this study, was to look at how much and in what ways internalized stigma is impacting people. So my main goal, like I said, is to see how does internalized stigma impact people with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. Specifically, does it impact their engagement with mental health treatment? So this could be like therapy or psychiatry appointments, for instance. Does it impact their recovery, which by recovery, I'm referring to things like their ability to engage in social relationships, work, school, other daily activities. And the design for this study was mixed methods, meaning I included both quantitative and qualitative data. So I had questionnaires where they would get a score for each of the things that we're measuring, and then also open response surveys where I would ask them to describe in their own words how they were experiencing internalized stigma and if it was affecting different areas of their lives or not. And this was all online, so people could participate from anywhere in the country. Just so you have a better idea of what internalized stigma might look like, these are some of the sample items included in the questionnaire that I used. So some of the statements that they could agree or disagree with to different extents were: being around people who don't have a mental illness makes me feel out of place or inadequate. I can't contribute anything to society because I have a mental illness. And stereotypes about the mentally ill apply to me. So those are all statements showing that someone is experiencing internalized stigma. So for a few reasons, I could not have done this study without the Freedman Center support. First, the type of qualitative data analysis that I wanted to use in order to look at the participant responses, called thematic analysis, I did not have experience with before. Especially Ben Gorham and David Beals have been really helpful in helping me to, like, pointing me towards training resources, talking through the different steps that I would need to take in order to do that type of data analysis. And this allows me to pull out themes. So when you look at all the different participant responses, trying to find commonalities in the themes that they're describing about the ways that internalized stigma is impacting them. Also, I was fortunate to get funding for 2 additional coders through the Freedman Fellowship. So this is Katie and Sophia. They're undergrad RAs, and they both help with the thematic analysis, which is going to make it more reliable versus just one person doing it. I also got access and support in using NVivo and also other text analysis programs. So NVivo, I'm going to show you some screenshots in a little bit to describe how I'm using it, but it's what I've been using in order to conduct the thematic analysis, which is in progress right now. And then I've talked with David and Ben about using some other text analysis programs as well after, in a more exploratory way, to follow up on what we find with the thematic analysis. And then lastly, the funding has allowed me to pay participants $10 each in Amazon gift cards in exchange for their time and participation. So far, I got IRB approval, data collection is complete, and then the 2 types of analyses are both in progress. So the thematic analysis as well as looking at the questionnaires. So I'm going to show a few examples of how I've been using NVivo. So this is one of the participants' responses to one of the open response questions. I'm not going to read it out loud because it's kind of long, and we'll look at some shorter examples in a minute, but feel free to read it. These over here on the right, oh yeah, I do have a mouse. These are some of the codes that Katie and I have started the coding process, which is part of the thematic analysis. So these are some of the codes that we've assigned to different pieces of text within this response. So NVivo allows you to visualize it, and it kind of shows up on the side here. And the different codes that you've assigned to that piece of text, you can then click on the code. So if I were to click on one of these, it would highlight the piece of text that we have coded as matching up with that. Here's another view in NVivo. So under the bigger theme of social impacts of internalized stigma, these are some of the codes that we have been finding in the participant responses. And then if I were to double click on one of these codes, so for instance, if I double click on trouble making friends, it would bring me to this view where you can see each of the pieces of text that is under that code. So it's a really helpful and easy way to visualize all the different codes that you've come up with, the different pieces of text that go into it, and then eventually I'll be able to better organize and maybe combine some codes if it makes sense to do that, or pull apart codes if it makes sense to do that. We're still in the process of all that. So preliminary results. So we recruited 29 participants, which was the goal. More of them seem to have schizoaffective disorder as opposed to schizophrenia, which I'm not exactly sure why. I was kind of surprised by that, but for whatever reason, we have more of that disorder than schizophrenia. Looking at the questionnaires, so greater internalized stigma so far it does appear associated with lower levels of recovery, which is what I thought. So meaning more trouble with relationships or with your daily activities or your work or school life is associated with more internalized stigma. But then it was actually in the opposite direction of what I expected for the engagement in treatment. So people who have more stigma are actually seeming to be more engaged in treatment, which there are several reasons for that. And this little snapshot does not show us the causality or anything, but that's part of why I wanted to look at participant responses, because I specifically was asking them to describe their perception of the causality, like if they see it as, whether they see the stigma as causing any of these concerns. So that's one way to get at possible causality where the questionnaires can't. And these are some of the emerging themes that we've come up with through the beginning process of the thematic analysis. So under the category of social life impacts, one of the themes that has been coming up is people are describing avoidance of close relationships. And here are just a couple of quotes that people said that go under this category. So someone said, "I hesitate to cultivate friendships with normal people for fear of their judgment of me." Someone else said, "I avoid any relationship close enough that I would feel obligated to mention it," meaning mention their disorder. And then you can read those quotes too on the right for desire to hide. The word cloud created in NVivo also kind of aligns with some of these emerging themes. So you can see some of the words like people, social, activities, and then some of the smaller words on the outside like relationship. Those are kind of like matching what we're starting to find with social impacts of internalized stigma. And then a few challenges we've come to so far are where to recruit from. I'm going to just really brief because I'm almost out of time, but we ended up going with researchmatch.org. So big plug for that if anybody's looking for participants with a certain diagnosis. It was really helpful. Decision making around thematic analysis. So there are some decisions that have to be made with how to establish reliability. And I was fortunate to consult with people who helped me with making those decisions. And then also participants under guardianship. So I learned that for future studies in this population, I would want to ahead of time talk with the IRB about how to include people who can't make their own medical decisions because there is a portion of people with this disorder who are under guardianship, but still I think should be able to participate if they want to. And then what's next? Finish the thematic analysis in order to finish coming up with looking at what themes arise, compare the quantitative and qualitative results, conduct sentiment analysis, which is another type of text analysis that David has mentioned we can kind of learn or I can learn with his support. And then future directions will include finding additional ways to get people to describe internalized effects of stigma, because a lot of times people were describing more public stigma. So I would like to try to find a way to get them to like tune in with the internalized impacts of that rather than describing the public stigma so much. And then I hope that the results of this study in similar studies like it, can be eventually used for things like promoting the interventions into mental health treatment that address internalized stigma. So quick acknowledgements. Thank you to the Freedman Student Fellows Program, David and Ben, and then the Clinical Neuroscience Lab and my advisor, Sarah Hope Lincoln, as well as Katie and Sophia, the RAs who are helping with this study. Thanks. Any questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Jill. One question I have, in your work with the participants, were you able to identify some ways that treatment might be developed to address the internal stigma, or how your study will impact the view of treatment of patients with schizophrenia?
Yeah, great question. So there are some treatments out there, or some ideas on how to address internalized stigma in treatment. One of them is like cognitive methods, so helping people like look at their cognition, their thoughts around like their own stigma about themselves, sort of based on what they're hearing. So working on their thoughts, also social skills training. So helping people to like develop better social skills, and which could help build more confidence, which can help with the stigma. Also focusing on goals, like working towards goals for the future can be a way to help people find more purpose and meaning. So there are actually already some methods out there for addressing it, but it's just not, it's not like so widely included always in treatment. Like the stigma aspect of it is not always a big focus. So I would say it's already out there, but my goal would be to promote like that we need to include that type of treatment more often. Yeah.
So my question was regarding your use of in vivo and text analysis, which is something new for this project.
Yeah.
Has that started changing things on how you think about doing research with other projects? Now that it's a tool that you have sort of in your tool belt, has that had an effect on you and how you think about research and other ways of doing other those types of
Yeah,
research?
I would say so, because I've always wanted to learn how to do thematic analysis because I think it's a great way to look at participants' own words and including like their own perspectives. So that was kind of holding me back from doing that type of research before. So I think going forward, I will try to include like open response questions and participants' own words into future studies, and then I'll be able to look at the responses. So yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I believe next up we have Ina Rabinovich-Fox. Come on down. And I think we have just this one. Is this you? That's all you need?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. I'm Aina Rabinovich-Fox. I teach in the history department. I'm a historian of women and gender. And this project, or this idea for project, came to be because 2023 is the centennial year for the introduction of the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, to Congress, and we're very thankful for Senator Schuman to that just in the last week kind of like knew that we kind of like reached to the end of this project, so he put the ERA again to the Senate. So there's a lot of talk in the news about the ERA if you're following, and because we still don't have it in the Constitution. We can talk about that, why. But there's a long history about the debates, and the idea was to create a class that was not just about the history and legacies of that, so student will learn about it, but also that student will have the ability to kind of like experiment with public history and public history tools to create a project. So not just to kind of like learn about this very important history, but to kind of like develop experience beyond kind of like just how you teach history into more kind of like experimental ways. So the big project it's kind of like their deadline is Monday, so it's still a work in progress. It had two parts. One of it is to curate and design an exhibition that is being actually installed as we speak. The big launch of that project is going to be Tuesday at 3:00 here in the library, so you can come again and to see it's going to be there. And that's where students really try to kind of like, right, so in the course, we didn't just learn about the history, but really to think about how you tell a story and an argument through visual means, right? So students had to pick images. We talked a lot about things like copyrights and things like that sometimes, you know, students not necessarily think, what does it mean to have public domain picture copyright images, who to talk to, which credit to give, and also experimenting with a new form of writing. Writing exhibit labels are very different from writing a term paper. And really to think how to tell the story and what story they want to tell, because everything in history is complicated and you can tell it in different ways. So that was, so one part was to create that exhibition that will be on KSL for the next month. But exhibitions are kind of like ephemeral. And so the idea, and that's where the Freedman Fellows kicked in, was to create a website that would be a complementary to that exhibition and really kind of like to think about it in more, you know, a long-term goal. So we used Scalar, which is a great program for this type of storytelling and presentation. And we had David Beals come and explaining to the students how to work with this. This is not the most kind of like intuitive software, although I think it has a lot of advantages because the way it's built and the way it is kind of like lending itself to telling stories that maybe WordPress or other kind of like website softwares that are more intuitive is useful, but students get it. And what I find always surprising is that you would think that the students, right, are kind of like native in this realm of technology. They're not. So there's a lot of kind of like scaffolding and learning process that we had to go through that semester of kind of like, so how exactly am I doing it? It's not, they're good in consuming technology. They're not very good at kind of like working with technology. So I think we let them experiment also with kind of like new softwares and new skills that I thought, and I still think it was helpful for them. So this is still kind of like, as I said, a work in progress, but I'm gonna show you a bit of so this is kind of like right, an introduction to the to that project, kind of like tells the rationale of the exhibit and the website. We also formed a timeline, again using another software, Timeline GS. All of these are also open source softwares, which were easy to work with. And kind of like, so the student had to look at kind of like the website. Again, this is another still work in progress, but you can see, so this software can really pull you in a timeline, but you can put images and videos. See, that's what happens when you're not, when it's not completely ready. But I want to kind of like move us, and it really is, as you can see, a century-long debate, which not a lot of people are actually familiar with. Everybody thought, a lot of people actually think that the ERA is still in the is already in the Constitution, are very surprised to hear that we don't have the ERA in the Constitution. And it is really kind of like a story of women's rights through the last century, when we got into kind of like more the recent past. That's we're still in the 70s, which is a big time for that. And then right, and there was a lot of questions of how we're gonna end this timeline. Because as you can see, I'm gonna move us to, so Hillary, Nevada ratified the ERA in 2017, Illinois in 2018, and Virginia became the 38th state in 2020, which is really putting the 38 required state to certify the amendment. There's all kind of like legal issues of why the amendment is still not ratified. But then, right, Dobbs happened in June 24, 2022, that really put the need for the ERA on back of people's mind, was kind of like dormant for a lot of time. And people were like, oh, we don't need the ERA because we already got all the rights without the ERA. And then Dobbs happened and people kind of like realized that maybe we should have an amendment to prevent those type of things. But I didn't want to end the end line with Dobbs. So luckily, and Senator Durbin and Schumer decided to take on the ERA again. So it's still very much not just our project is a work in progress, but the ratification of the ERA is the work in progress. So in this February, they conduct a hearing. Yesterday, they had a vote. So we had a chance to update the timeline, but we're still kind of like the vote was actually bipartisan in favor of extending the deadline, but it didn't reach the filibuster, so it was 51-47. So we're still waiting for that. I won't hold my dream was that maybe in 2023 we can celebrate, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Anyway, just to kind of give you another sense, there's also a section about the women of the ERA, kind of like the main biographies of women who were involved in pushing and sometimes going against the ERA, like Frances Perkins, for example, who was not a big supporter of the ERA. I'll just give you, and it was really important for students to really showcase multiple voices, especially of people who are not white women. So Pauli Murray, for example, who was a very important activist and a lawyer, who kind of was very intersectional in in herself and in her legal thought. So students kind of build their own little biographies on each person, so you can learn about them more. Patsy Mink, the kind of mother of Title IX, and to kind of through that also to get into topics that are not just the amendment, but more kind of connected to women's right. You can see here kind of some of them. So each of them have their own sections that is kind of what is their role in the exhibition. So as you see, their deadline is on Monday, so they can still work on that technically. I would not shame them. But so it's still very much a work in progress. But the idea is to kind of start working both with media and with this type of program. And I think students appreciated this. This is a new experiment. Sometimes it was a new thing for them. And sometimes they're kind of well, we never did this before and what we're supposed to do. But they kind of got together and they're all very excited about the exhibition coming to life and the website. So yeah, that's basically it. Oh, yeah, and the most important thing this is now in Scalar, but it will be live, and it's era-history.com. So by Tuesday, you can go to the internet and see this live.
Thank you so much, Einab. I really appreciate coming from an art history background myself, your exposure, you exposing the students to that storytelling, curating process. And I can tell from what you've shared today that that's a really wonderful learning experience for them. And also great that you have this now online resource that will be available. And so my question is, what kind of life will this resource take beyond the life of the class that you've taught this past semester? And will you teach in this way again? And those sorts of things. What's the life beyond this?
Yeah, great question. So the website is supposed to live forever, right? There's never forever in the internet, but technically, right, it is supposed to leave after the exhibition will go. And we hope one of the assignments that the student had was to kind of think about outreach assignments. And there were really creative things there. And one of them really talked about how to use the website to kind of educate and mobilize people into action. Because again, the struggle for ratify the ERA is still an ongoing struggle, and kind of and the students were really kind of we need to tell people about it, right? To use it as a way to educate other people and move them into action and to kind of to form political pressure to ratify the amendment. So there's a lot of thinking about kind of using the website itself as a way for educating, the larger community on those topics. And this is something that, this, and I also talked kind of like with Elizabeth, who is kind of like the person from the library who's helping us to kind of like install the exhibition. And it really is something that, as a public history, right, this can, like, it was easy that 2023 was the centennial year, but you can really do it with any other topic, right? So, and it's a really easy way for a student to get like real life hands-on experience in kind of like curation and in public history, in building and using those skills that they really cannot get in any other way unless they're having internship in museums. So I think like this model is actually very useful to take. I did 3 years ago when it was the suffrage centennial, the 19th Amendment centennial. We did a very similar project that was also funded by the Freedman Fellows, but then we had COVID, so that ruined some of the plans. But the suffrage website's still alive, so you can check that out as well, clevelandsuffrage.com. So I think now there is kind of like this model that I can take to other classes and other topics, because it really is kind of like more of a template. Yeah.
Actually, maybe a question to segue as we segue between projects that are also web-based, and more of a question for the Freedman folks, because our modeling tends to be based on an academic year, and so many of these projects are something that is going online. Is a part of this, are these all going to disappear in 2 or 3 years when the faculty decide, I don't want to pay to renew that URL? Or is it built into the Freedman funding that there's sort of a list of archival things that we want to keep this going, we're going to renew that every year, every time that comes up, and host that website somewhere?
That's a great question. That's a great question. There is always that concern. One of the things that we ask people to consider when they're proposing Freedman Fellowship projects is, what is the lifespan? What are you going to do in 5 years from now? What if you move institutions? Who's going to host this? And the answer just depends. It's a case-by-case basis. Some people want it to live forever. Some people want something more of a flash in the pan. So we're going to work with people however we can. Often there are going to be opportunities to kind of archive it and keep it hosted in our Scalar site, move an instance or a snapshot of it to something like OSF, or keep it hosted on ArcGIS online. But sometimes people want it to retire after a certain period. So that's always a conversation we have, and it's a really important question to keep in mind.
Yeah, I can add.
Sure, add some more.
So yeah, it's not built into the life of the fellowship and the project, but as Ben said, we do talk in the beginning stages of what the project life should be. One thing that we're attempting to do, and you'll hear about it later, is working with one of our student fellows to at least create a collection of projects that we've funded in the past and snapshots of those. So while we don't have the resources to host them here within the library, we can at least provide a catalog of the things that have happened, which we hope to be an inspiration to people moving forward on their projects. So David was working with Manish, who will present in a couple moments. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, we have George Blake. And I believe, let me make sure people get a chance to see your title slide. I worked hard on these, so I just want to make sure again. But come on up. Yes, George Blake talking about jazz in Akron, the hidden history of Howard Street. And I believe this is you, and you can see all of those. Yeah, feel free to.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let me get into. Okay. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I guess I want to start off this presentation by talking about, the idea of process as part of the product. So this has been a really cool process for me. I've been part of various iterations of doing research on musical Cleveland for a long time. The most recent take on this is that I've been working on Akron, and this morning, sort of coincidentally, I got an email from Akron jazz legend Jeannie Cheatham, 95 years old, and I told her about this project, and she's really excited about it. So she wants to talk to me about it, and it was sort of like, amazing. So there's been a lot of interest in this work in various iterations, from musicians, from people who are who who are thinking about some of these the questions of the history of jazz is usually told with a few key cities and a few key musicians, and then there are all these other stories. So what happens to them? And so I want to thank the Freedman Center for allowing me to do this research and start finding ways of getting into telling these stories. There's not just one way to tell history, as Inev was saying. And so this has been a real challenge of being able to ask new kinds of historical questions by working with my amazing research assistant, Leonard Liu, and Gina Yang. Leonard's here, hooray. And we've been going through all these digitized all this digitized work from the Colin Post, which is Cleveland's African-American newspaper, all this digitized work from the Plain Dealer, digitized work from various Akron publications, which have been less consistent, but we've found ways of telling the story. So I'll just start off with this as a kind of quick anecdote. One way that I could try to shift the lens from the usual way of telling jazz history towards a kind of post-industrial Midwestern jazz story or something like that, would be to say something like Miles Davis played here, which is true. And I've created a little map over here that's sort of like all the legendary figures you might want, to cover in a Jazz 101 course, and saying like, oh, if you went 4 blocks that way and went back and got in a time machine 60 years, you would see Ella Fitzgerald play, right? So that's one way to tell the story. But interestingly, this Akron project came about with really when I showed one of the earlier projects to this guy. This is Theron Brown on the piano right here, and you might recognize the trumpet player. It's Don Cheadle playing Miles Davis. So this is a very familiar story way of telling our jazz history. Is you say, well, Miles Davis is famous, so we'll talk about Miles Davis, then we'll make a movie about him. Interestingly, I told this to Theron, who plays Herbie Hancock in the movie. Theron is an Akron musician who wants to tell the Akron story. And I'd kind of shown some of the maps I'd created about Cleveland to him. And he was like, oh, we got to do something about Akron. So that's kind of an ongoing process of both working with him personally. I did some research on this podcast. This is the Akron Heritage Music Project with Theron and a couple other jazz folks. So we're getting into telling a different kind of story about Akron music history that is not one necessarily of famous musicians, although they absolutely came through, but trying to understand what happened to this street. There's this Howard Street, which there were 72 bars on Howard Street. Many of them had jazz. Many of them don't have records of what happened there. But there are a few records. So, for example, Sonny Stitt played Where a Highway Is. And so this is like the big story really of what's the history of urban renewal in relationship to the history of this street. And so this is essentially a scholarship that's allowing me to be a little bit interdisciplinary. So Mindy Thompson-Fullove is a public health scholar, and in a kind of side note on one of her in her book Root Shock, she talks about basically how there's all these jazz as a community art form that was neighborhood based disappeared in the context of major urban renewal projects across the country. And Cleveland, as you might know, has one of the biggest urban renewal projects in the country, but Akron also had a significant one. And so there's this whole genre history of like what happened before urban renewal in all these different locations. So what I'm able to do with these kinds of maps and this data is like start to tell some of that story. And then there's another story that I'm also being able to tell, which is kind of getting at a Green Book history of jazz. So in Akron, the Green Book location was the Hotel Matthews. In Cleveland, it was the Majestic Hotel. And so I'll just jump over to a map that kind of, well, I want to show you some of the maps here, but this is another take on the story, which is to say the Green Book was a place that was seen as safe to travelers, African-American travelers. So visiting Akron or visiting Cleveland, and there are a few locations listed, and they had jazz in them, or they had jazz musicians staying, okay? So this is the Majestic Hotel in Cleveland, you have the postcard. This is the Matthews Hotel in Akron. And yeah, this is where it is. I'll show you the maps in a second, but this kind of gives you just a sense of where they fit here. This is the Majestic Hotel. They're great little tidbits. I'll tell you about Tiny Grimes in a second. He's my key figure right now for all these fascinating things. But the Majestic Hotel, you could buy tickets to his concert there. So this starts to show the link. But also Duke Jenkins was the house musician at the Blue Mondays. So he'd play, I think it was something from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Mondays. Somehow someone was awake at that time. So in the early 50s, you could go to the Majestic Hotel and see Duke Jenkins play. So a lot of this involves getting at these questions of just where there's this missing archive, or we have scattered archives. Musicians often get to the archive by listening to old musicians. I got into this whole thing by talking to musicians, telling me about other musicians, telling me vaguely about what happened a long time ago. And a lot of this project is just trying to put points on a map and put really specific dates to places. Okay. Yeah, so one of these versions in the Cleveland context is Kenny Davis talking to Joe Mossbrook, who says right here, 3 blocks away, was a smaller version of 52nd Street, so 105th and Euclid. You would see musicians walking all along the streets. I've got some data to back that up. Then, there are other arguments about why Cleveland swings, why it's a city that matters as a jazz city. And one of the common ones is just that it's important because they're important people who came from here. And I'm going to shift now to showing, well, there's a musician story, there's a famous musician story, and then there's a venue geography story. And that's sort of what I'm able to tell a little bit more with all these maps. Okay. So just to give you a quick sense of, this is an all-inclusive map, which is to say every kind of data point we've been able to get that just says there was jazz somewhere, and this one's in Cleveland, but just to give you a taste of what it is. So here's the first 97. There are more than 300 of these. I haven't been able to mark them all, but what's fun is you can go and say okay, the Cotton Club, that was here, what's there now? And then you can zoom in and see, the W.E. Walker building is what's there now. And, oftentimes it's the story of there was an African-American community here and now there's a Cleveland Clinic. And so you'll find that in a number of different ways. Okay, so that's one take on how to do this project. In the Akron approach, there are these figures. Jimmy Knoll, Wayne Punchy Atkinson, and Duke Jenkins are these 3 figures who I've really focused in on. And I'll just get at a little bit of how this project is showing. So this is part of why Theron is so interested in this project, is because he performed with Jimmy Knoll. So the late Jimmy Knoll was one of the musicians he performed with. And so part of the story is just showing where were these places located in Akron on Howard Street. Yeah. Okay. And then we can get to other stories that are more migratory stories. Usually telling a story that's just 300 data points, like that first map, is a little bit unwieldy. It doesn't really, it helps to show that there was something, there's strong evidence that this exists and was a thing here. But so here we can tell more of the Duke Jenkins story, where you can get a sense of where he's born in Malvern. Going to college at Oxford before becoming the house band at the Majestic Hotel. So this is that Green Book hotel I mentioned earlier, which is now an abandoned lot. And so I'm really getting into land use questions now. I'm really hopefully the next iteration of this project is looking at where all these famous, what happened historically to these different locations. So he was playing at the Rose Room in the Majestic Hotel for a long time. he was also playing at various places kind of further out. And then he was playing at the Cafe Tijuana, which is another kind of local place where another Akron musician met him for the first time. So there's this Akron-Cleveland connection. And just so you get a sense, it's right here and we're right here. Okay, so thank you.
I especially appreciate the props.
Yeah.
This is definitely something we've talked about before, George, but thank you for this. And I'm curious, obviously this is a digital scholarship project. There's been a lot of digital iterations of this work. And I'm wondering what your current take is on possibilities from moving it from the digital to the real in any sense. Like, this is a great map and it's a wonderful kind of journey we can go on. Could we have like a walking path through the city where we actually see snippets of this as we're in that place? Is that a possibility in the future, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've had conversations with University Circle Inc. about some of these things, and there are people. I mean, I think part of the process product thing is finding all these other people who are interested in this. So there's like Cleveland Data Days is now interested in this, and there are people in. There's a filmmaker who was working on kind of the Voices of Howard Street up here, Legends of Howard Street, who hasn't finished this film. It's not.
First, I started playing with Duke Jenkins.
Oh, sorry, that's what that is. Okay, got it.
Supper club.
Sorry.
In around the Canton area. I played with him until they came.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great legendary Punchy Atkinson talking. But so there's a filmmaker who's really interested in this project who hasn't been able to finish his film, and there are just other people who are really interested in telling these kinds of things. So I don't quite know where it's going to go. I mean, like, this is like creating a landmark, but like times 1,000 with none of the red tape. So I don't know, what that means, but there are definitely possibilities for displaying it at the Bop Stop. That's still maybe going to be a thing. We'll see.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions for George? Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
I was looking at you going through the map and the concert announcements, and I just wanted to hear some jazz. Right? So, is there any recordings, or is that resource just as sparse as all the other things you're looking for, or is that something you've thought about including? Like, I don't know if that's available at all, but I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that I'm aware that not everyone is as devoted to the budget bins of various local record stores as I am, but like that's a whole part of my personality that doesn't get a lot of necessarily funding. But yes, I mean, so there are recordings for these things. I mean, I think it's interesting because someone like Punchy Atkinson, who was just talking, is famous because he was on a Wes Montgomery album, and which is a very very famous figure, and this is like his one thing. What's interesting and kind of recurrent with a lot of these musicians is that they played on a famous album by somebody, or they were asked to join a touring group, but they had a family, so they stayed in town. So yes, there's an archive, and then I'm in a way interested in what didn't get recorded because someone wanted to stay home with their kids or something like that. So it's a combination of those two things. There are some local pressings of some of these things, and musicians have taken up the idea of like recording some of these folks before they pass away. So there's some of that too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Next up, we have our own Jen Green presenting for Felix Young.
Hello, I'm Jen Green. I'm the team leader for the Digital Scholarship Team. And I had the pleasure of being the liaison to our student Xiaodong Yan, who goes by Felix. And just a little bit about the fellowship program that Felix was participating in. We have 2 tracks of our student fellowship. You heard Jill and Prajakta speak earlier, and they are students that came to us with projects of their own, and the fellowship is available for funding projects that students come to us with. Felix and Manish, who will present after me, were part of our collections researcher track. And those students come to us because we have projects in the library, digital scholarship projects that we're looking for interested students to help us work on. And so the project that Felix worked on was called Transcribing the William Powell Jones Letter Collection. And I'm presenting for Felix because he graduated in December and has moved on and is working in the field of finance. He has a master's in finance. And we initially got to know Felix because he was a student employee in the university archives. And so he became aware of the fellowship and applied and continued his work in the library over here, working with special collections. So a little bit about the project that was going on in the library. The William Powell Jones letter collection is housed within our special collections here in this building. And William Powell Jones was a PhD graduate in English from Harvard University. He's actually originally from Georgia, graduated from Emory with an undergrad, and joined the Western Reserve University, WRU, faculty in 1930. And he during his time here, he donated letters that were authored by various 18th and 19th century authors. And those letters have been, while they exist physically in special collections, they've also been digitized over the years and are available on Digital Case, which is our institutional repository for special collections and archival material. What we don't get on Digital Case is the searchable transcriptions of those letters. So I'll show you in a minute what the written letters look like. And so what Felix was helping us do is to take some typed transcripts that had been created over the years, actual typewriter transcripts, and run them through a software called Optical Character Recognition, OCR, so that we could have digital text files that could then be ingested and matched with the records that exist on our Digital Case. And if you want to know more about the William Powell Jones collection, you should really go to ArchiveSpace. There's a whole record there created by our university archives team that gives a little bit more history than I just gave you now about William Powell Jones. Okay, so this is what these letters look like on Digital Case. This is a screenshot. So you can see that they're written in a very elaborate style of handwriting that may be difficult for even a human eye to read. So at one point, and this often, one of the things that we had Felix do is meet with our special collection staff to take a look at these letters within the collection, be able to handle them so that he had some context for what he was working towards. And also they talked with him about the importance of transcription for special collections and archival records, and that it's one thing we love it when people come to the building and look at these objects in person. We love it next when they can find them online, but the next level of actually finding them online is making them searchable. And so each of these records has a metadata record that describes what the letter looks like, where it's housed, where it came from. But the text is obviously not machine readable, and that's what we're shooting for with a lot of our digital collections. So Felix was learning, before we even had him get started on the OCR, we made sure that he had an understanding of the context for what happens. So this is a screenshot of the typed transcripts that Felix ran through OCR. And for Felix, one thing that he learned right away, it wasn't just a process of running a software across the typed transcripts. What you get out of the software is not always what you see here. And at the time that these were transcribed, typed, there were things that the person who did the original transcription were not able to read for sure. And so that's where you see some of the underline with the handwriting that we think this is what was added. And so using Adobe OCR, Felix processed this particular file. And this is an image of this actual letter here, just to give all of you some context. That was the typed version. And then this is the final OCR version that Felix created. And so when this came out, there were errors and omissions because the OCR won't pick up the handwriting that was on the previous file. And so Felix's job, bless his heart, was to go back and make those edits by hand. So what's interesting to me, and Felix and I talked about this from time to time, is that you start with a physical object and you work towards making it digital, and in the end you end up working with it physically again by correcting it by hand. A person needs to be involved in the whole life of this object. So the next steps, like I said, there are 75 letters that we have on Digital Case. The handwritten, the transcriptions are now complete. They've all been OCR'd, corrected. Felix graduated and left us in December, but he left us with a nice collection of digital text files that we can now ingest into Digital Case and connect. Our preservation services team will connect them with their sibling records so that when you go, you can search for William Knighton's good offices and eventually find the letter based on those search terms and not just rely on what was written about the physical object in the metadata record. And that's it. Yeah. And if you have questions, I can try to answer them. Otherwise, we'll... And next we have Manish Tyagi, and he is our other collections researcher fellow, and his work started, come on up, Manish. His work started after Felix ended his project. Manish started in February.
Okay, I'll just pull up your slideshow real quick.
Yeah.
Hopefully. This is you? Yeah. All right. All good.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Manish, and I'm a Master of Finance student at Witherhead School of Management. This project is all about creating a living index for the entire Freedman projects on the on Scalar. So as we move forward, the introduction of this entire project was to actually have all the projects from the Freedman projects from 2005 till 2021. And make them available in the online platform so that everyone can access and read about all that work we have done in the past. Moving on to how did the timeline look like? So I started this in February. So initially we started with deciding the hard copies we had for all these projects and then transferring them into an Excel format. And once we actually formatted it into an Excel format, what we did was we actually went, so with David, I was back and forth and having feedbacks and doing all the corrections in the data. Then we had once this was all into the Excel spreadsheet, I learned Scalar from David, and he explained me how to do how to do everything. And then once that was done, I created there were close to so the current page looks like this. If I see it, if it works, okay. So this is how it looks like currently. And when we go, there are close to 96 projects which have been included in the Scalar right now. And if you see, this is the timeline which goes from 2005 till you can track it till the recent 2021, 2022. And whenever we go if we want to see what's there in these projects, what we can do is we can just directly click on here and see what was this project about, who did it, what was the department they related to, and then a brief description about the projects. So if you go in there are different projects which happens in this, and then we go, so some of them which are recent, I'll just walk you through that. So if you see this, So this will all have as like information about all the projects which have been done in the past and currently exist in the scaler. And as like this is it. Okay, where is my presentation?
Six to the right.
Okay. So it's like this is how the current page looks like, and this is how it's like the timeline of this entire has been prepared into a timeline. So, okay, if someone wants to go into a specific year, go there and then search whichever project they want to search. And thank you so much, and special thanks to Vans as like who has funded this program and given me opportunity from as like creating this index, and as well as me learning more about Scalar, which I didn't had any clue. It's like how to do that stuff. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay.
I was wondering, thank you for this, if any part of this project did or might in the future involve going back and contacting the people who made these projects in like 2005 and saying, hey, we're looking for some more images. Is there any updates? Can we add this stuff? Or is it just whatever's out there?
So for example, what we had was for me, it was like we had a specific document with us, and like in that all the details are there in that project. So if we later on, what we can do is we can translate those pages and scan pages into the web page, so that if someone wants to go and dig deep into the format, they can actually upload it later on.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking for like a where are they now page.
Yeah.
Our Freedman fellows.
They're
This would be
like
a great
that.
resource to start
Yep.
with, something like that. Great. Thank you. Other questions?
Add to that answers.
Can you use the microphone?
Sure. Yep. Just to quickly add to the answer, there's a huge archive of existing Scalar projects, many of which are earlier Freedman Fellow projects, which are going to be added to this as links. And there's live web pages out there. So in addition to contacting people, there's a lot of different levels that we've talked about adding. And one of the other things we mentioned adding was once we add today's presentations to this timeline, then we can add the videos from MediaVision also. So we can go back and look for those old presentations too.
For sure. Do we have any more questions?
Wrap it up. Thank you, Manish.
Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to wrap up by thanking all of you for being here today, and thanking all of our fellows for all of their work this year and talking with us today about the progress and process and results of their projects. You're welcome to stay and mingle and have some snacks. I want to just reiterate our thanks to the Freedman family for their generous donation and support of our fellows, and the continuity of that funding each year. We look forward to working with all of our fellows in the years ahead. And I want to thank Ben for coordinating this whole day and for taking on the role of our Freedman Fellows coordinator.